Hey, so Fire Mage is pretty complicated, and I'm not very good at it, but I do still have a lot of fun when I'm playing it, and I think the big reason for that is that I really like combusting. And I looked around the internet and I found out that a lot of people share this sentiment. You know, this guy loves combusting. This guy, he's probably combusting right now. I mean, this guy, he also just can't get enough. I mean, you get the point. But I think a big thing that has been missing in this combust community, as I like to call it, is a comprehensive, mathematically proven guide with integrity and grit behind it to tell you exactly how you should be using this extremely versatile cooldown. So this video is not going to do that, because that would be extremely boring. Instead, this video is going to give you what I would consider an unbelievably impractical yet mathematically sound way of utilizing combust to get the maximum possible damage output, and I mean maximum. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Matt, I don't play World of Warcraft, that's a game for nerds, and I'm a big dick person who plays Valorant. What is going on here? And that's very valid, because WoW is a weird game, so I'm going to give you a very quick rundown of everything you need to know to be able to enjoy what I'm going to show you. In WoW, the only thing that matters is dealing damage. Some people will tell you that you also have to dodge abilities to stay alive. I would tell you that not dodging abilities in order to deal more damage is what I would call optimal play. And if you're dying, that's a healer issue. See, here I die, because I stood in an ability, and here's what you can type if this happens. You can type, just heal me more. Lol. Now, you might be looking at that and thinking, well, that's weird, why do you have to stand in abilities in order to deal more damage? And the reason is that when you deal damage on a mage, the only way you can do it is by casting abilities. And in order to cast abilities, you have to be standing still. So, you understand that we deal damage through casting abilities and standing still. The next question is, how do we deal more damage? And for this, I'm going to introduce you to a little stat we call crit. Now, crit in WoW, if you play League of Legends, it works the exact same. It's just a percentage chance that when you use an attack, it does double damage. Critting in WoW feels good, because you and your teammates can all look at how much damage everyone is doing, which means that if you randomly crit a lot, your damage number can end up being significantly higher than your teammates. And this matters because now that you are doing way more damage than them, you're able to shit-talk them, which is excellent. So now we understand that we like to cast abilities to deal damage, and we like to crit to deal more damage. And the reason we want to do this is so we can shit-talk our teammates. Where does combust come into all of this? Very simply, combust means that every ability you cast for the next 14 seconds, guaranteed crits. So the fundamental question of this video is, how well can we optimize that small 14-second damage window for the maximum possible output so that our teammates are left just like crying at their monitor, damage graph burned into their retinas? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to How to Bust with Maximum Efficiency. The first step is to generate a list of all Fire Mage abilities, and then calculate how much damage each of those abilities would do under the perfect conditions. Now, the damage that your abilities do in WoW is determined by some stats and your item level. And as a heroic raiding Andy, who actually mains a Preservation Evoker, I'm no expert on having a high item level Fire Mage. I think my current Fire Mage is sitting at like 390, which is bad. So we're gonna have to use someone else's character for this max damage combust. The most geared Fire Mage that I know of is a man called GingiPumper. He raids for Echo, he's very good, and similarly to me, he shares a passion for combusting.
Ooh, I like to combust. Daddy asked what you do for living, son. You compute all the time. I say, Daddy, I will combust for living. Ooh, I'm proud of you, son. You have the biggest combust in the world.
Tell you what, he might not yet have the biggest combust in the world, but after this he will. Now, his character is geared to the teeth. I'm recording this video on May 10th, 2023, and as of right now, this is what his gear looks like. It's pretty good. But gear doesn't matter if I don't know what he can do with it, and right now, I don't know what he can do with it. And this is where I ran into my first wall. I know what Gingi's character looks like, I know what his items are, and I know he loves combusting, but I just don't know how much damage each of his abilities do, which is a big problem for a video about min-maxing damage. And so, I'm getting flashbacks just saying this. The only option was to calculate how much damage each of his abilities do by hand. which sucks. So let me take you through the process. The number one thing you need to know when you're trying to calculate the damage of an ability is the statistics of the character who is casting the ability. And so what I needed to do first was look at each of Gingi's items and then put their statistics into a spreadsheet. Gingi has a lot of items, and this took a very long time. And I got about 3/4 of the way through before I realized that I could have just scrolled down and it would have shown me all of his stats. Fuck me, dude. Needless to say, I wasn't happy. But despite having wasted a significant portion of time, the grind doesn't stop. Now that I have his stats, I have to figure out how to convert raw statistics into damage numbers. And this step is quite involved. It had a lot of nerdy maths and a big fucking spreadsheet, but in the end it turned out to be quite simple. For anyone interested, which had better be all of you, here's how it works. Every damaging ability in the mage's kit has its damage calculated by a variable called spell power. Take Pyroblast, a generic mage spell. Its damage is very simply 168% spell power. Now, you won't find spell power on your stat page, and if you take Pyroblast damage as 168% spell power and then use that to find 100% spell power, you'll find that the number you get doesn't actually match any of your stats either. And the reason for this is funny, but very annoying to figure out. Let's look at Pyroblast again. On my Fire Mage with 390 item level, Pyroblast does 12,937 damage. The two stats that say they modify damage in their tooltip are the stats called Intellect and Versatility. On my mage, I have this much Intellect, and I have this much Versatility. I'm not saying the damn numbers. It just so happens that if you find 168% of my Intellect, and then add the value of my Versatility, you get 12,937, which, ladies and gentlemen, is our lucky number. Well, lucky number for you, unlucky number for me, because with this information it means that I now have a way of hand calculating the damage of every single one of Gingi's abilities. And so now, it's time for another big fucking spreadsheet. Let me take you through the process. The first step is to list out all of the mage's damaging abilities. Next, I used Wowhead to find the spell power percentage of each of these abilities, and the step after that is when it starts getting fun. See, Fire Mage is a spec with many talent options that modify your stats depending on certain events occurring. I'll give you one example. There's a talent called Fire Mind, which increases your intellect by 2% for every hot streak consumed. Hot streak, by the way, is a Fire Mage talent that means when you crit twice in a row, you can instantly cast a Pyroblast. We'll get to it later. See how complicated this is? Anyway, a 2% intellect increase means that I have to recalculate the damage of the ability. And there are a silly amount of these talents that modify your stats. Here they all are. And when I looked at this, here is what I decided. I've got two options. Number one is to, for every single ability, calculate the base damage and damage per second of it once. And then, for every single talent, of which there are, 15 or 16, that could possibly modify the damage either positively or negatively, I have to, by hand, recalculate the damage to account for each of those individual options. This option would have led to a slightly more accurate final answer, but would have also increased the time that this took by probably days. So instead I went with option 2, which was to calculate the base damage once without any modifiers, and then to calculate the maximum possible damage, assuming that all modifiers are active all the time. And this is not only the significantly faster option, but the significantly more fun to look at option. So that's the one we'll be talking about. And I'm very glad I did this, because despite going with the faster option, it still really sucked. Now, before I talk about all of that and create a priority order of abilities based on DPS and all that good stuff, let's talk about what is the best possible situation for dealing damage. So, there are a couple of things we care about while we're combusting. Number one, I mentioned Hot Streak earlier, which is the thing where if you crit twice in a row, you get a free instant cast Pyroblast. This is the number one thing that we want to be generating, because Pyroblasts do a lot of damage, and the more Pyroblasts we can get out, the better we're doing. That in mind, how do we generate lots of Pyroblasts? Well, we always crit in Combust, and in order to generate a Pyroblast for free, all we need to do is crit twice in a row. So the best way to generate Pyroblasts is to cast your abilities really, really, really fast. In WoW, the stat that allows you to cast your abilities faster is called Haste, and there are a few ways that we can optimize how much haste we have. Number one is the most obvious. Mages have a spell called Time Warp, which all you need to know about it is that it's a 10-minute cooldown, and that it increases our haste by a flat 30%, which is really, really good. Number two, let's talk about races. So, there are a bunch of different races in WoW, and each of the races have certain bonuses to picking them. We're going to be picking the race called Troll, and the reason for that is because they have this bonus, which means they get this ability called Berserking. And when they press Berserking, their haste just increases by a flat 15%. So we're going to press Time Warp, we're going to press Berserking at the same time, we're going to get a flat 45% haste increase. And this third step is likely the most obscure step, but it is an incredibly impactful increase to our haste that you need to be doing if you want to be playing optimally. Here's what it is. You're going to need to buy WoW on another account and launch up WoW on that computer at the same time as you're playing WoW on your main computer. And you're going to have to make a priest, and you're going to have to level up that priest to the same level as your main. Now, on that priest, when we cast Berserking and we cast Time Warp, you're going to have to press this button called Power Infusion on us, and that's going to give us another 25% haste increase. So if you do all of that, in total, we're going to have a 70% haste increase on top of what we already had, which is, like, insane. And you might be thinking, oh, Matt, that's, like, very silly, just to get a friend to cast Power Infusion on you. But the thing you're forgetting is that we're playing WoW, so the friend thing, it's not an option. So at the end of min-maxing our haste stat, we're sitting at a pretty healthy, astoundingly big 97.2% haste, which means we're casting at almost double speed, which is not bad. You know, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. But there is one more thing that we haven't talked about, not to do with haste. And this one thing is that in WoW, certain boss fights, the boss will cast an ability that will give you a damage buff, which, you know, it's not a great idea. If I was a raid boss, personally, probably would avoid doing that, but, you know, does happen. And the most notable instance of bosses casting a buff on their enemy is Odin and his rune phase. And this is very recent. And basically what he would do is he would cast this spell on you that if you did it properly, you'd just get a flat 50% damage increase, which you wouldn't see otherwise. It's pretty nuts. So combining all of these big buffs into like one big thing, and then taking into account a few smaller damage increases like, you know, potions and certain talents, we're finally able to calculate some damage. And there are a lot of boring things here, but the main things I took into account were the 200% damage increase crit modifier, because we're always critting, the Odin buff, and the haste buffs. And with this, I was able to make a list of abilities that do the most DPS under these conditions, and sort of a priority list of casting in our combustion. Now, this is the part where it gets a little bit trickier to follow, because we're going to have to start talking about actual abilities in the game and what they do. So I will be providing helpful footage in the background whenever I'm talking about a certain ability, so hopefully you'll be able to make sense of what's going on. So the number one thing we want to be doing is instant casting Pyroblast using the Hot Streak bonus, where we crit twice in a row. By itself, that would do 96,000 DPS, which is really, really good. Now, the next thing on the priority list is a little bit more difficult to understand, and it's called a Pyroclasm Pyroblast. Now, for you non-Fire Mage players, and for you non-WoW players in general, Pyroclasm is a random proc, which you can sometimes get when you crit lots, which means that the next time you cast a Pyroblast that isn't instant, it does 230% increased damage. Now, there are some drawbacks to this. It means that you have to hard cast, which is why you don't instantly cast it. You have to, like, sit there and cast the ability. You have to hard cast a Pyroblast, which does take a while. But remember, we have 97% haste, which means that the usual 3.5 second cast time is only 1.7 seconds. And despite that cast time, Pyroclasm still does 90,000 DPS. It does about 160,000 raw damage, which is, like, incredibly big. After those two, there is a significant drop in raw damage output. Next is this spell called Phoenix Flames, which is another instant cast spell, but it only does 50,000 DPS. Next is a spell called Shifting Power, which does 40,000 DPS, but also notably resets the cooldowns of most of our other spells, and we'll get to that later. And then comes normal Pyroblast, which you just hardcast. Then comes a Fireball, then comes Frostbolt, then comes Flame Strike, and then in last place by a mile comes Scorch, which does about 6,000 DPS. So that's a lot of numbers. But what does this mean? Very, very simple. The number one thing that we want to be doing is generating instant cast Pyroblasts through Hot Streak. And that is also the conventional advice, but now I've proven it with my maths. Now, if you do play WoW, you might have noticed I didn't mention Fire Blast, because it technically does infinite DPS. It has 0 cast time and isn't on the GCD. This is for WoW players. So it does infinite DPS. However, a single cast of it does about 40,000 damage. It is the highest priority spell that we want to be casting, because it has 0 cast time. So it does just immediately generate an instant Pyroblast. So with this priority order in mind, we're able to generate an optimal cast order of abilities. And the idea is that whenever we can, we want to instant cast a Pyroblast. Otherwise, we want to go down in the priority order and look at what is next available. So if we have a Pyroclasm proc, we're going to cast Pyroclasm and then instant cast a Pyroblast. If we don't have that, we're going to cast Phoenix Flames and then instant cast Pyroblast. If we don't have Phoenix Flames, we're going to cast Shifting Power. And if you don't have Shifting Power, I mean, let's be real, like, what the fuck are you doing? So we have an understanding of all of the raw numbers, we have a basic understanding of what we should be casting in this combustion. What's our opener? How are we going to start? Well, there is some setup. You're going to have to do 3 things before we can start. Number 1, you're going to have to get a stack of Pyroclasm, which is the random proc that you get. It's a 30% chance every time you crit. That means your next hard cast Pyroblast does 230% increased damage. You're going to have to get a stack of that. Number 2, you're going to have to build up 8 stacks of Sun King's Blessing, which is a talent that means that after you've hot streaked 8 times, which is where you instant cast a Pyroblast, next time you hard cast a Pyroblast, you get a free combustion, alright? And number 3, and this is the hardest one, you're just going to have to naturally crit 5 times in a row with Fireball while holding on to these 2 stacks. Now, that, it's pretty tricky to do that. The chance in all of these 3 things happening together is about 1 in 9,500, but we take those odds, ladies and gentlemen, because it gives us a minor DPS increase and a significantly longer combust. So, you've got all those things. What's next? Begin your opener. Charge up your Pyroclasm, and right as it finishes casting, Pop Blast, Pop Berserking, Alt-Tab, Power Infuse yourself in your Priest, Alt-Tab back in, and step into your rune. Then, the exact frame that the Pyroclasm hits, you need to press Fire Blast, and then Pyroblast, and then Fire Blast. If you've done this correctly, you will have done about 450,000 damage in the space of 1 frame, or around about 4.5 million DPS. And it's at this point your pug might start to realize that they're in for something big. You now have a 20-second combust window, and you need to play frame perfectly for the entire thing. The second it's off GCD, we press Pyroblast into another frame-perfect Fire Blast. It's now been 1.4 seconds, and we've done 612,000 damage. We're out of Fire Blast now, but we do have a Pyroclasm, so we Pyroclasm into instant cast Pyroblast. 3.1 seconds, we're almost at 1,000,000 damage, and we're not even close to being done. Shifting Power does 80k damage over 2 seconds and resets the cooldown of 2 of our Fire Blasts, and the third one comes off cooldown naturally. We can now begin the Fire Blast Pyroblast chain again. That contributes an extra 660,000 damage, meaning we're now sitting in a cozy 1.5 million damage after 7.2 seconds. Another Pyroclasm Pyroblast combo, that rises up to 1.85 million after 9.5 seconds. 10.5 seconds left. We're out of Pyroclasms and we're out of Fire Blast, so it's time for Phoenix Flames. Phoenix Flames, Pyroblast, Phoenix Flames, Pyroblast, and Fire Blast is off cooldown, so we use that and then Pyroblast. And we're on 2.3 million damage. Pyroclasm Pyroblast extends our combust by a further 6 seconds, and does another 350,000 damage over the course of 2.4 seconds. 2.6 million damage in 15.4 seconds, 10.6 seconds left in the combust. Fire Blast, Pyroblast, and we're out of Fire Blast, and then Phoenix Flames, and we don't have a Pyroclasm, so it's time to Fireball. Fireball, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Phoenix Flames, Pyroblast, Pyroclasm, Pyroblast, and that's another extra 700,000 damage over 6.9 seconds. We now have 3 seconds left, 2 charges of Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, 1.7 seconds to go, we finish frame perfectly with the Pyroclasm Pyroblast, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is a frame perfect 4.2 million damage combustion single target.